Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to this episode of The Federal. My name is Naved Anjum, and I'm joined today by a very distinguished guest, Mr. Shankar Aiyar. Welcome to this show, sir.
Thank you.
It's wonderful to have you with us. It's an absolute pleasure. Mr. Aiyar has just come out with a book which has been published by Juggernaut. It's called The Rajiv I Knew and Why He Was India's Most Misunderstood Prime Minister. It's a companion volume to his memoir, which was called Memoirs of a Maverick, which came out last year, and it chronicles the first 50 years of his distinguished career as a diplomat, and it also goes back a little in time and talks about his early years in Lahore and your education and stuff like that. So, Mr. Aiyar, let's begin with this book. It's of course a product of your research, and as you mentioned in the book, that since it had tone of a biography rather than a memoir, you chose to have it separately as per the suggestion of the publisher to bring it out as a companion volume to the memoir. And it's about a figure who of course was very pioneering in many ways as a leader, and you write in the very beginning that how he was the most sort of reluctant prime minister, so to speak, because he saw himself thrust into the into politics, even though he was somebody who was very shy and would always be unassuming and not really be out there. So if you could give us a sense of of how Mr. Rajiv Gandhi, when he came to power, was betrayed by a lot of people that you mentioned, was how his brief stint as prime minister was sort of marred by the controversies on the one hand, but also the fact that he was betrayed by his own close aides.
Yeah, Rajiv ji was very reluctant to be in the public limelight, and that is illustrated by a story told by his headmaster's wife, Mrs. Martin, that when Jawaharlal Nehru came to visit him in school, he couldn't be found. And ultimately, another boy said that when we play hide and seek, we sometimes hide in those large wicker baskets where dirty clothes were thrown in, and maybe he's there. So he was hiding in a wicker basket so as to not be thrust into the spotlight in the company of his grandfather. So that was the kind of person he was. And I don't think he'd have ever come into politics or aspired to be a minister or prime minister if it hadn't been for the utterly unexpected and sudden death of his brother. At that point, Mrs. Gandhi asked him to come into politics. So he actually said in public that Mummy wanted me in politics. So he came in very reluctantly. And having come in, he got himself involved with the Youth Congress and the Student Congress. And there was no higher ambition. Of course, he did get elected to Parliament from Sanjay's seat. But that apart, there was no indication to begin with that he was in any way interested in high office. And he would perhaps not have come to high office for at least 10 or 15 years, because Mrs. Gandhi was only 67 when she was assassinated. So she clearly had 10 to 15 to 20 years before her. And yet, because of the assassination and the party being organized by Arun Nehru into saying you must elect him as the successor, to everybody's astonishment, including my own, he was suddenly sworn in as Prime Minister on the evening of the very day that his mother had been killed. I had expected that there would be an interim Prime Minister, like there had been after first the death of Jawaharlal Nehru and then the death of Lal Bahadur Shastri. And it seemed to me it was obvious that Pranab Mukherjee would be the interim Prime Minister. And I think Pranab thought he was going to be. And perhaps for that reason, there were differences between him and the Prime Minister, which didn't get resolved till a couple of years went by. So Rajiv was, as you rightly said, a very reluctant Prime Minister. But when I asked him at the Doon School Golden Jubilee about whether Mrs. Martin's story was true, he gave an answer that did not answer the question. He said, you know, Mani, it's not as if I didn't have ideas of my own, but that if I expressed them, then people would say, if I agreed with my grandfather, that you're just parroting your grandfather. And if I opposed them, then they would say, what right have you to oppose your great-grandfather? So he said, I decided to keep my opinion to myself. And writing about this while he was still alive, I said that the only place in school where he distinguished himself was the dark room of the photography club, where he could work without anybody seeing him. So that was the man who suddenly became Prime Minister. In other words, somebody who had thought about the nation, thought about where the nation should go, but had no intention of himself being the process through which his ideas would be attained. So, to everyone's surprise, especially once he got elected with a majority of some 404 seats in Parliament, it came to everyone as a surprise that he did actually have a very well thought out plan for where he wanted India to go. And the rest of his political career, both as Prime Minister and as Leader of Opposition, was designed to implement the idea of India which he had in his mind and which had been deeply influenced by his grandfather particularly.
You write about this paradox of his personality, that, you know, the fact that he was a good man, and you know, but in politics there's no place for good men, right? So
I wouldn't say there's no place for them. They face special difficulties. And while it is true that there were a few people who betrayed him, it's also true, and I've tried to stress that there were hundreds who didn't betray him. There were thousands of Congress workers. There were dozens of bureaucrats who actually served him as he desired and as he had instructed them to do. So the betrayers were the exception, they were not the rule. But it has been portrayed that the betrayers were the key persons and that they had got it right. Whereas I think Rajiv was too principled a man to follow the opportunism that characterized those who opposed him, people like Arun Nehru, Arif Mohammad Khan, V.P. Singh, and several others.
You write about them in detail, but you are unsparing, particularly when it comes to Arun Nehru.
Well, because he was unsparing in doing down poor Rajiv Gandhi. I did say to you earlier today that Arun Nehru was instrumental in getting the party to make a reluctant Rajiv Gandhi the Prime Minister. And I think the reason he did that was that he thought Rajiv would be his puppet and that he would be the de facto Prime Minister. And I've quoted at length Prabhu Chawla's profile of him in India Today, which talks about how he is going to be the key, he is the fulcrum around which everything runs. So he wanted to be the power behind the throne because he understood that he could not sit on the throne. And so he picked a person he thought would be his puppet. But the puppet turned out to not want any strings and cut off those strings many of the ideas that Arun Nehru had, which I now see that Mr. Modi has. So he was basically a Hindu majoritarian. And he was the one, I remember him talking about it, about how we have to make the Bangladesh immigrants into Assam a key issue. He was the one who got the locks open in order to pander to Hindu sentiment. And Rajiv was not like that at all. And he was a man who believed in unity in diversity, who had a very profound belief in secularism, who felt that the biggest minority of India needed to be treated with compassion. And it is that compassion which the BJP describes as tushtikaran or appeasement. You appease an enemy. The Muslims are not an enemy. when Chamberlain made this word popular, appeasement, he did it with respect to Hitler. So when the BJP uses the word Tushtikaran, it amounts to saying that the Muslim is the enemy, and instead of opposing him, you are supporting him. This is a complete misnomer and a complete misunderstanding of the nature of India, that is the idea of India as a composite nation of all the religions, all the cultures, all the languages, all the creeds, all the beliefs of the people of India, who after all are numerous and therefore have numerous diversities. And we therefore said that the fundamental principle of our modern nationhood will be unity in diversity. So if you try and impose uniformity, you will reduce the degree of unity in the country. But if you accept, respect, and celebrate the diversity of India, then its unity increases. And that was the fundamental precept of Rajiv Gandhi's thinking.
Right. Mr. Aiyar, the very fact that, when he took over, and those were, of course, very, very turbulent times. I mean, in the sense that he had inherited a country which was, which had been seeing conflict, and that became particularly worse in Punjab and Mizoram, and you write about it in detail of all that. Give us a sense of how he sort of tackled all this, and even though his brief stint was marred by these controversies, he somehow continued to focus on,
The India that he inherited was really an India that he had inherited from the Janata Party through his mother, Second Coming. Because all these problems had their origins in the Janata period, particularly the Punjab problem. And then Mrs. Gandhi attempted to sort it out when she came into power a second time. But she was being, I think, enclosed by others like P.C. Alexander, who had a very bureaucratic approach, by Zail Singh, who had a very political approach, and who had in fact encouraged Bhindranwale because he thought that would weaken the Akali Dal. So when Rajiv became the Prime Minister, he didn't have any of these constraints. And he had lived through the problem. So he had by that time been in politics for 3 or 4 years. And of course earlier he'd been thinking about it. So he came to the conclusion that the only way of resolving this issue is for the Congress to give up power in Punjab and give it to the Akali Dal, so that the Akali Dal becomes the one that tackles terrorism in the name of Khalistan. And he therefore worked out an absolutely individual strategy in this regard. His almost first act after becoming the elected Prime Minister, that is in January 1985, was to release Harchand Singh Longowal from jail. Then I went with him. It was my first trip with him. We went to Firozpur, and particularly to the site where there is the Bhagat Singh statue. And he reached out to the Punjabis there, saying that we are proud of our Sikh community. We cherish them. We regard them as a national asset. So just come back and belong to our nation, because we need you even more than you need us. And that signal, to transmit it politically, he chose his wisest political assistant, namely Arjun Singh, who had just won the election as the Chief Minister of Madhya Pradesh. And within about 24 hours of his swearing in, he was asked to resign and come and become the Governor of Punjab. And he used, and that's all described in Arjun Singh's own autobiography, where he reached out to these people. He said that no Khalistani will be checked, body checked, before he comes in to see him. He said, you come in. If you got a pistol, put it on the table. But I'm being sent to talk to you. And I used to see a lot of Arjun Singh, because my office room in Parliament House became a kind of waiting room for people wanting to go and see Rajiv Gandhi. And so Arjun Singh, I found, was almost every day in Delhi. It was very surprising. But what he did, Chandigarh to Delhi by air is only half an hour. So he used to come in and report to Rajiv, and all this was very secretive between Rajiv and Arjun Singh as to what Arjun Singh could offer Logowal as well as Barnala. And that is why when suddenly in July there was this announcement of a Punjab Accord, it took the nation not only by surprise, they were astonished that this young man who'd been Prime Minister for less than 6 months was achieving what his mother couldn't achieve and what Morarji Desai couldn't achieve. So it showed that he had a particular ability, but that ability depended on making an opposition party the ruling party at the expense of the Congress. And that was the source of the problem between Zail Singh and Rajiv Gandhi. Zail Singh never got over being a Punjab politician opposed to the Akali Dal. So when he found the Punjab being gifted to the Akali Dal, because an essential part of the agreement was having an election, and Zail Singh knew that they would lose the election, that the Akalis would win, which is what happened. But what unfortunately Rajiv did, and that perhaps revealed a lack of experience, was that he not only took all their issues like the Sutlej, Yamuna link and Chandigarh and so forth into account, he laid down a very, very narrow deadline to solve these problems. And it was because the deadlines were far too soon and the judges were confronted with too many arguments that they couldn't resolve, that the issue, that it looked as if the Punjab Accord had disintegrated. But by allowing the Akali Dal to become the main state instrument of dealing with the Khalistanis, he was able to secure a division of opinion in Punjab between those who felt they wanted to be in India and those, that little minority that wanted to separate. And they had the support of Pakistan, let's not forget. And the net result was that over a period of time, the terrorists were defeated and peace has come to reign. And today you can easily go to Punjab anywhere. But when you were a little boy, just about the time you were born, when I went to Punjab, I used to come back to Delhi and find that everyone in Delhi wanted to know, well, how did you go? What happened to you? So the Punjab that he inherited and the Punjab that he left were as different as chalk and cheese. He inherited a Punjab in insurgency and he left a Punjab at peace. And the same technique was then used by him in Assam, where he simply told these youngsters, you come to an agreement with me, I'll give you an election, you're bound to win the election. And the Congress party said, but how can you gift the state away to them? And Rajiv had the confidence that we give it to them now, then we get it back. And sure enough, both in Punjab and in Assam, the Congress came back to power. And in Mizoram, and I think that was really astonishing, there had been an insurgency from 1966 onwards. And because Mizoram is bordered on the one side, on its west, by East Pakistan, and on its east by Myanmar, in an area that is hardly governed, it was possible for these insurgents to continue their insurgency for 20 years. 20 years. It was the most disturbed part of India. And what did Rajiv do? He got hold of the leader of the insurgents, Lal Denga, and told him, I'll make you the chief minister. So he made the rebel the chief minister and then said that your deputy chief minister will be the congressman who had been elected. So he therefore gave power to the insurgents. They couldn't resist that. And later on the Congress came into power. And until this last election, every 10 years, the Congress and the insurgents in the Mizo National Front, they have been changing power and doing it very peacefully. the most peaceful state in India in terms of internal law and order is today Mizoram. But because it's so far away, there are very few people in India who appreciate the importance of the periphery. And in Rajiv Gandhi's case, he had come to the conclusion even before he became Prime Minister that the heartland of India can only remain with India. There's no place that UP or Bihar can secede to. But the periphery, the geographic periphery, always has an option of separating. And therefore that has to be brought in to the mainstream of the nation, which is why his tours were mostly to the fringes of India. He also found that in our society we have a mainstream which comprises the four castes, the four Varnas. But the ones outside that, especially the tribals, but also to a very large extent the scheduled castes, they need special attention. So he gave them that special attention. But perhaps he included the backward castes in the mainstream. So as he was going, as he in his last year, when the Mandal Commission report was accepted by VP Singh, I think it caught us a little off guard. But otherwise, the periphery of India, whether it was the Andaman Nicobar, whether it was Arunachal, whether it was Lakshadweep, whether it was the peninsular India, he went to Tamil Nadu 13 times, driving by road all over the place. So there was a very great consciousness that India needed to be kept together, and that the first job of the Prime Minister was to ensure that the unity and emotional integrity of India must be preserved. And for that, it was necessary to reach out to anybody who felt he was being discriminated against. The Tamil, because he felt he was being discriminated against on language. The tribals of the northeast, because they felt that they were being neglected. The tribals of central India, because they were being discriminated against by the non-tribal peoples and governments. So he reached out to them. And he was the one who started the practice of eating in these dhanis in Rajasthan, so that he could be seen as completely breaking any rules of untouchability that might have pervaded in our society. So in all this, he had a sense of India. He did not belong to any part of India, although he was a Kashmiri. He belonged to all of India, and India accepted him as belonging to all of them. And I say this from personal experience, because I did, after all, go with him to all these places. And in doing that, he was really following precedents set by Jawaharlal Nehru and Indira Gandhi.
But also, despite all his achievements, the fact that his years were really, really overshadowed by the issues that rocked his prime ministership, and primarily, of course, Bofors and the Ayodhya issue, of course.
Well, let's begin with the first controversy, which was the Shah Bano case. Now, the easiest thing for the Prime Minister to do, especially because his Director of Minority Affairs, Wajahat Habibullah, had recommended that since the Supreme Court has spoken, there's no need for you to do anything further. But he noticed that the Muslim community, as represented in Parliament, was almost unanimous in denouncing the Shah Bano judgment. In other words, Muslim sentiment, Muslim mainstream sentiment, had been deeply concerned at the way in which Muslim personal law was being made justiciable outside the framework of the Muslim Qazi. He also found that although there were people like Arif Muhammad Khan who were in favor of not in any way touching the Shah Bano judgment, that were they representative really of the Muslim community? And I've explained in the book how Salman Khurshid got in a delegation of boys from the Aligarh Muslim University, and Rajiv went across to Salman's house and sat with them and listened to what they had to say. And when he got up, he had only one sentence to speak, which was that I understand that there are many communities in India. Each of them has its own identity, its own social practices, its own religious rituals, and I shall have to take all this into account in deciding what to do. In other words, he did not take the easy path. If he just done nothing, there would have been no controversy. But on the other hand, would the Muslim community have felt that India, secular India, had their interests at heart? Would they have agreed that the pledge we made, that their Muslim personal law would not be touched, was being touched? Were we betraying them? So what did Rajiv do? He didn't reverse that judgment. He actually implemented it. And who said he implemented it? It was the Supreme Court itself which said in 2001 that he did not reverse the 85 judgment. He actually implemented it through the act that he passed, which is called the Muslim Women Protection of Rights on Divorce Act 1986. That act was challenged by Daniel Latifi, a leftist who happened to be a Muslim. I don't think he was a religious person, but he was a Muslim. So he filed a writ petition in 1986, September. Unfortunately, in my view, the Supreme Court took 15 years to come to his judgment. But his judgment was unanimous. It was a bench. And the bench said that not only has it not been reversed, it has been incorporated in the act. And the big difference that has been made is that instead of the Qazi deciding whether the Waqf board should support the woman, the magistrate will decide whether the state Waqf board has done its duty or not. And if they have not done their duty, then they will be punished by the magistrate. This made the government of India the ultimate arbiter on what would be done for these women, whereas the Supreme Court had just decided that the woman should get 179 rupees a month, plus 20 paise. I don't know where they got that 20 paise from. And who can live on 179 rupees and 20 paise a month? And it's interesting that although the husband, after the Supreme Court judgment, had to go on putting that 179 rupees and 20 paise into the Supreme Court because he couldn't hand it to her directly, she never withdrew the money. So clearly she was not so indigent. But nevertheless, the point is that the Supreme Court took up Article 15, Article 21, I think, and one other article, which all give the fundamental rights, and said none of them had been violated by what Rajiv Gandhi did. And yet he was portrayed as appeasing the Muslims. Rajiv said to me one day, he said that according to the opposition, I have lost the vote of all women, Muslim as well as non-Muslim. And I've lost the votes of almost everyone who supported me last time, because the left and the liberals have all joined hands with the communalists. So whom does that leave me with? He says it leaves me with a handful of Muslim clerics. So whom am I supposed to be appeasing? That was his last sentence on the subject to me. So if he is appeasing nobody, if he was respecting Muslim personal law, if he was combining that with the constitutional judgment of the Supreme Court and producing an answer which was simply brilliant, because the answer was that you don't pay the woman for the period of iddat. You pay the iddat for her lifetime within the period of iddat. That was the chief change that was made. That is not for the period of iddat, that is 3 months, but within the period of 3 months that you give her the settlement so that you don't have any connection between husband and wife after divorce. And yet all this was portrayed as being an attempt to appease the Muslim after having opened the locks to appease the Hindu. Now, why should a Prime Minister with a majority in Parliament that Modi has never achieved? He had 100 seats more than Modi at the moment. Why should he be playing one community against the other? That was the politics of Arun Nehru. It was not the politics of Rajiv Gandhi. And yet, because the court takes so long to come to its conclusions, we had this phenomenon of him being besmirched, of his reputation being besmirched, when in fact he had done a very noble thing. Equally on Bofors. On Bofors, everybody was convinced that the man was a crook. But he was, after all, the Prime Minister. He'd taken an oath of secrecy. So what he was discussing with his own people had to be a secret until VP Singh, as Prime Minister, put the papers on the table of the House. And what did the High Court decide ultimately? Ultimately means after all the papers had been obtained from Sweden and Switzerland and elsewhere, the CBI came back in 1997 triumphantly with a huge trove of papers. They looked through it, they conducted the investigation, they conducted the prosecution. And the High Court judge, Justice Kapoor, he said there's not a scintilla of evidence that has been provided to show that Rajiv Gandhi took any money. He also said that the payments that were made were the final settlement by Bofors of its agents. And Rajiv Gandhi had said that. And I think the whole story is too complex for me to relate here.
But in both the cases he has been vindicated in some
and vindicated him totally. So if he was innocent on Bofors, and if he was not the person responsible for opening the locks, then what is he being blamed for? Why was his reputation so badly stained? And if only the Supreme Court had given its two judgments of 2018 on Bofors and of 2001 on the Muslim Divorce Act, we wouldn't have had this. I mean, if they just acted quickly in the public interest, then we need not have seen the disappearance not only of Rajiv Gandhi, but the disappearance of his dream. For after all, what is it that united the left and the liberals and the BJP? It was opposition to Rajiv Gandhi. And as a result of that, if you go into bed with a snake, it'll bite you. And that is what has happened. That the BJP, which had been reduced to 2 seats in 1984, came up with 88 because of the support extended by VP Singh and the communists and everybody else. He lasted what? 9 months, 11 months, because he was supported on the right by a BJP and on the left by the communists. So there were 2 unequal crutches. And if somebody walks on 2 unequal crutches, he's bound to fall. So he fell. In the and of course because of that, they removed the SPG cover from Rajiv and Rajiv got killed. And what did we get? We got Narasimha Rao. And what did Narasimha Rao do? Instead of opposing the BJP, he kept appeasing the BJP. And at the end, the BJP cheated him. Or at any rate, the Sangh Parivar cheated him.
You write about your own sort of encounter with him, early encounter with him, and there's this brief episode about this lot of questions that he shares with you about
yes. On Shah Bano?
And this also.
And Bofors. No, the questions
about I think more on Ayodhya and
On Shah Bano, there were a number of what was Muslim personal law. Now you're a 43-year-old young man. How many Muslim weddings have you attended? Even if you have, I'm sure you've been at the reception and eaten the kormas. You haven't really listened to the Nikah-nama.
Nobody does.
The Nikah-nama is a divorce document. It says what will be the conditions that will apply if the marriage breaks up. Now, can you imagine a Hindu wedding at which just before they do the circle of the fire, somebody gets up and says, yeah, but what happens if this marriage breaks up? You'll be thrown out. So there's a fundamental difference. An assumption is made in Islamic marriages that there could be a divorce. And therefore the Nikah-nama is a contract in which the conditions under which the marriage will be split up are spelt out. And those say that the meher should be returned and there should be a settlement made. But that was interpreted as a settlement made during the iddat period. Whereas what Rajiv Gandhi did was, you make the settlement within the iddat period, but for a lifetime. And subsequently there has been a survey done, which I have quoted, which shows that 78% of Muslim divorced women get remarried within 2 years. So the problem is not as acute among them as it is for other communities. So we've got to respect the fact that there is an Islamic jurisprudence. It is not some wild nomadic practice from the Arab desert of the 7th century, as is portrayed by Indian communalists, particularly the BJP, who think that all justice is in the Manusmriti and all injustice is in the Quran. This is rubbish. And what Rajiv did was he refused to listen to this rubbish. And he tried to find out, what does Muslim personal law say? And in doing that, he ended the argument in Parliament, because the same Z.R. Ansari, who was given permission to refute Arif Muhammad Khan, was the one who finished his speech by asking Banatwala to withdraw the bill that he had presented, which would have reversed the judgment, saying that I have firm information, obviously from the Prime Minister, that he is finding a way out. And the way out was the Muslim Women's Bill that was passed in May 1986.
Right. Mr. Aiyar, let's talk about a little bit about one of the highlights of his stint as a Prime Minister, and that is of course the Panchayati Raj, of which you were the architect, and you were very
well, I wasn't the architect.
Yeah, I mean, in the sense that right. So if you could give us a sense of how, you mentioned somewhere during the the elections that he was contesting, and your own thrust on the fact that he should be fighting on the basis of, like, that could be the sort of.
You see, Panchayati Raj was not a new idea. Far from that. Mahatma Gandhi had insisted that the panchayat should be the basis of our entire democracy. He wanted the panchayat system to be made the basis of the constitution. But Dr. Ambedkar was opposed to that, with the result that almost the last article that Mahatma Gandhi wrote in his magazine was expressing astonishment that the words Panchayat and Raj did not appear in the draft constitution. And then there was a long argument during 1948, which I have described at length here. And ultimately, there was a gentleman who ultimately became a member of parliament from my constituency. He brought in some words which were put in the directive principles of state policy. And Jawaharlal Nehru didn't take part in that argument. But after he started the first plan, he found that there was no delivery mechanism for the grassroots. And so he set up the Balwantrai Mehta study group. And that study group recommended that if you have panchayats at 3 levels, the district level, the intermediate level, and the village level, then these can become the instruments through which delivery takes place to the grassroots. And Nehru was so excited about all this that, having passed a model bill, and he could only do a model bill in Delhi because Panchayati Raj had been put in the state list. But that model bill was then reproduced as state legislation in all the states of India, and Panchayati Raj was begun. But within 2 years, or within 5 years, Jawaharlal Nehru passed away, and with him passed Panchayat Raj away. And Indira Gandhi was under so much challenge that she was involved with centralization, not with decentralization. So when Rajiv became Prime Minister, nearly 40 years after the Constitution had been passed, well, 35 years after the Constitution had been passed, he found that the biggest lacuna was that we did not have a mechanism for last-minute delivery of development. And we didn't have a mechanism to involve people in their own villages in what they wanted. I mean, one village might want a school, another village might want a road, a third village might want a well, a fourth village might want a drain. So why was this being decided in Delhi? And there'd be so much money given to the state, and they would then divide it by the number of villages and say, all of you build schools. Building schools where there's already a school is nonsense. Or building a well where there's already a well is nonsense. So, therefore, Rajiv said, let the people participate in the planning process and let them be the instruments of delivering the goodies to the people according to the wishes of the people. And that would be the panchayat. And the panchayat would be responsible, like the government is responsible to the legislature, to the Gram Sabha, so that there would be a check and balance on the spot. Today, what is the check and balance? It is that the local BDO writes out the utilization certificate. It then comes to a joint secretary in Delhi. Now, how does the joint secretary know whether the bus stand has been built or not? But anybody living in the village knows whether the bus stand has been built or not. And if it has been built, they want to know why is it that this bus stand has cost 2 lakh rupees, when the neighboring village, the bus stand has only cost 1 lakh rupees. And the answer comes out that is because the 2 lakh contract was given by the sarpanch to his son-in-law. So this kind of monitoring of development expenditure is best done at the grassroots. And it is only when it's certified that by the Gram Sabha that this work has been done, that you can then say that the next installment comes. But the present system has joint secretaries in development ministries spending as much as 80% of their time on checking on UCs, when the UCs themselves can be falsely prepared at the grassroots level. Right. So Rajiv went on a very, very extensive tour of rural India in his first full year as Prime Minister. And that was the year that I joined him. So I was in charge of organizing these programs and accompanying him, taking notes, collecting petitions, seeing to it that the state governments responded. And so with my own eyes I saw him repeatedly making this question as to what is the relationship between the villager and the BDO. And it turned out that it was a relationship between the social superior and the social inferior. That what happened in a village depended on what the BDO wanted, not what the people wanted. And that is how he came to the conclusion that we need to go back to Gandhi and Nehru and bring Panchayati Raj in. And why had it failed? It was because it was not in the Constitution. And so it was
brought in the Constitution much later as a...
He brought it into the Constitution. So he didn't bring Panchayati Raj, he brought in constitutional Panchayati Raj. And the consequence is that for better or for worse, we have Panchayat Raj all over the country. Before him, because it was not in the Constitution, Panchayats would get elected, they'd remain in power for 15, 20 years. They would not get elected, there'd be no elections. But now the system has been made such that even though there are some aberrations every now and then, by and large, Panchayat Raj institutions have become ineluctable, irremovable, irreversible. That is Rajiv Gandhi's achievement. That the institutions of local self-government have come into existence. Unfortunately, because they are on the state subject, or maybe fortunately, because they are in the state subjects, it is ultimately for the state government to do the devolution, not for the central government. And the central government can only give direction. But for give direction, if Rajiv had come back alive and become the Prime Minister, then he would have ensured that implementation took place. But Narasimha Rao was not so interested, and nobody, not even Dr. Manmohan Singh, was so interested, with the result that implementation has been fitful. It's much better in some states, particularly in the south. In Kerala, Karnataka, there has been enormous progress. In the north, I think UP is the worst example. So it varies from state to state, But this I will say on the basis of my experience, which is now 15 years old, as the minister, that when I had the information, I found that while some states were moving far ahead and other states were laggards, all states, including places like UP, were moving forward. So I remembered that I'd asked Rajiv Gandhi when he thought that Panchayati Raj would become a reality. And he said to me, at least one generation, which means at least 25 years. So only 25 years have now passed, or 30 years have now passed. Now we are moving forward, and I think eventually we will have a strong system of Panchayati Raj.
Right. Talking about his life and legacies, Mr. Aiyar, you write, I think, at some point in the book that one of the key learnings from his years as a prime minister is the fact that he was somebody who would set in motion a lot of things as soon as he realized that the party was in crisis. Today, all of us know that Congress is staring at perhaps the worst crisis in history. It has had two Lok Sabha debacles in the last 10 years, and perhaps staring at the third one in this year. So, if you could give us a sense of what are the key learnings from?
Well, I would say the key learning, especially at this critical time, when, as you rightly say, we have undergone two debacles, is that we have to learn that in our kind of democracy, you sometimes have to stoop to conquer. After all, what did Rajiv do in these troubled states? He made the Congress party lose so that it could win again. And in the process, bring the insurgent state back into the mainstream of the nation. Now we need to do that at the center. We need to stoop to conquer. And I'm very glad to see that we are taking very seriously our subordinate role in the India alliance. I saw a newspaper report, this is an unconfirmed newspaper report, that the Congress intends to contest from only 255 seats. That the remaining ones, which are nearly 300, will be contested by partners in the alliance. So it shows that we've learned the lesson of humility, that we've learned that we are no longer the natural party of governance. It means that we have learned that we have to have the support of others in order to be able to prevail. And it also shows the self-confidence that Rajiv did in the States by now saying that we will not demand the prime ministership, we will not demand the leadership, we will allow the movement to decide who should be the chairman of the India Alliance. And it is they who've suggested that Mr. Kharge should be the leader of the alliance and very possibly the face of the alliance in the election. And that's a brilliant move, because not only is Mr. Kharge a very experienced politician, it so happens that he comes from the south, which is much less opposed to the Congress than the north is.
Absolutely. We have seen in the Assembly State
belongs to the scheduled caste, so appealing to the margins of society. And the proposal did not come from the Congress. It came initially from Mamata Banerjee and Arvind Kejriwal, who are locked in battle in their respective states with the Congress, nobody else. So I think we've learnt, I think the Congress party, by becoming a humble member of the Indian Alliance, has gone back to the Rajiv Gandhi model of how to run the party.
What is your assessment of, say, of the shape of things to come in 2024? Do you think it's still a foregone conclusion, or is there going to be some hay? Yeah.
For the shape of things to come, I would say we need to set 3 objectives before ourselves in a certain order of priority. Number 1, our biggest aim should be to defeat Modi. That is, to ensure that he gets less than 272 seats. That should be our minimum objective. The more important objective, if possible, is to deny him a two-third majority so that the Constitution of India remains sacred and sanctified. And the third objective would be to just let him not get a two-third majority. So if you grade your objectives in this way, if you are very fortunate and very able, then we may be able to bring him down to, let us say, 200 seats. Like Rajiv Gandhi was brought down to 192 seats. Same way, bring him down, if we can. If we can't, at least deny him 272 seats. And if you can't do that, then deny him the two-third majority. Okay. So, at some level we will win, but provided we have a clear idea of where we want to get. Where we want to get is a change of government. But if we can't do that, to prevent him from having the majority that will enable him to drastically alter the Constitution. Right. And I think we can win. I think, in fact, arithmetically, with Modi's party never having got more than 33% of the vote in 2014, and I think about 37% in 2019, the majority of Indians have not voted for this government, and yet it has a two-third majority in Parliament. So if we bring together the votes of the opposition, not entirely but substantially, then I think we can attain realistic objectives. So I don't believe the 2024 election is already decided and that Modi's third term as Prime Minister is assured. I also find that this attempt at making Ayodhya the Balakot of the 2024 election is not really working out. I mean, at one stage, all the four Shankar Acharyas had said they wouldn't attend. Now it seems that one or two of them might. But you can see that the religious community, the true Hindus, are objecting to Hindutva. And if you can break the nexus between Hindutva and Hinduism, then Hindutva just becomes a political ideology without an emotional connection to religion. And we can return to a constitution which says the state has no religion. But the sight of the Prime Minister of India actually installing the Ram Lalla statue, that is not a secular image. And it was to preserve our secular image that Jawaharlal Nehru told Dr. Rajendra Prasad that he could not go to Somnath as the President of India. If he went in a personal capacity, that's a different matter. But here the state, it is the Prime Minister. And I have just been told that there is a poster or something in Karnataka which shows a giant of a Prime Minister leading little Ram Lalla by the arm to take him to Ayodhya. This is the way in which the office of the Prime Minister is going to be abused for purely sectarian reasons. Then maybe Jinnah was right in saying that there are two nations. After all, we've proved Jinnah wrong for the last 70 years by saying that in the answer to an Islamic Pakistan is not a Hindu India, it's a secular India. But if you make this a Hindu Rashtra, then of course Jinnah's prediction or Jinnah's assumption that there are two nations will prove true. And as a matter of fact, V.D. Savarkar had said, he was the originator of the idea of two nations. So we are fighting in this election not for winning or losing the election. We are fighting for winning or losing the idea of India, which gave us our independence. So it is a historic election, and one in which I hope the India Alliance, and with that the Congress Party, will have a resurgence. And we will prevent this country from going down the Savarkar-Modi path.
Okay. Just to conclude, Mr. Aiyar, reading your book, one gets the sense that, even though you have been for over a decade now, been sort of sidelined, but there is no sense of rancor in the way you write your memoir, and including this book. And there's a beautiful paragraph in the end which sums up your which you describe your political career as, and you write that my rising and falling like a wave in a stormy sea is the story of the rest of my life, which begins from here, from this book onwards. And I call it a half-life in politics, much like the radioactive half-life discovered by Ernest Rutherford, the father of atomic physics, that is the phenomenon of radioactivity growing for a while and then slowly petering out in a similar way. My life in politics rose in spurts to its highs and then spluttered out to the point where I find myself sidelined by Rajiv Gandhi's years and marginalized even in the party. But that's another story for another book. But I wanted to understand from you, what do you make of this, of the fact that, even though you have been the most vocal and most honest and most, in the sense that frank leaders and spokespersons of the party and loyalists to the party.
I don't think the party either liked my vocalization or my frankness. And I think that is the reason why I've been sidelined. Now, I can be sidelined from the party, but I can't be sidelined from the ideology of the party. At least the ideology which I thought was the ideology of the Congress party. So I remain a very staunch congressman, and I remain a very strong Nehruvian, and I remain loyal to the ideas which generated from Rajiv Gandhi's heart and mind. A position in the party, it was given to me by Sonia Gandhi. It's now been taken away from me by Sonia Gandhi and by Rahul Gandhi and by Priyanka Gandhi. So I have been denied any position in the party now for more than 10 years. But instead of walking out of the party in rancor, to use your expression, I choose to remain in it, and I choose to hew my own path like a maverick that I am. I say what comes to my mind. In the context of the invitation to attend the consecration in Ayodhya, I have written an article just this week about how Nehru handled Somnath and how that contrasts with the way in which the current Prime Minister is handling Ayodhya. And
you mentioned in this book,
it specifically says that India must, and I have also quoted Rajiv Gandhi. Rajiv in Parliament, in a suo moto motion on secularism, he began his speech with two sentences, which I would like to quote to you from memory. I may get some comma wrong. He said, sentence number one was that only a secular India can survive. The next sentence was, and perhaps only a secular India deserves to survive. I challenge Mr. Modi to repeat this. That is the Congress philosophy. And it was a philosophy not because I was in the Congress and given some recognition, nor does it cease to be true merely because I am marginalized in the Congress. I don't matter. What matters is the philosophy of the Congress. And so long as the party hews to that line, I'm pleased. When they depart from it, and don't forget that Jawaharlal Nehru's secularism was not accepted by the whole party. People like Sardar Patel, K.M. Munshi, N.V. Gadgil, they, and Purushottam Das Tandon, they opposed the idea of India being a totally secular country. They wanted India to be secular because it was Hindu. And what Nehru said was, don't mix religion with politics. Secularism is a moral value irrespective of religion. So you don't have to be a Hindu to be tolerant. You can be tolerant without being a Hindu. So keep your Hinduism to one side and your tolerance, your secularism, your compassion to the political sphere, which will inform your politics. And he prevailed. as a result of which, right through his prime ministership, there was hardly any communal disturbance. And don't forget that at that time, people had gone through the trauma of partition. And still he won elections. The first election was entirely on the basis of whether there should be a secular India or a Hindu India. And the Hindus of India voted overwhelmingly for a secular India. So you've got very good material here. Hindus can either normally, naturally express themselves in tolerance, compassion, and equality for all religions. Or they can be bhatkawed into doing the kind of things that Hindutva does. Hindutva is not Hinduism. I think that is the fundamental point that we need to make in 2024. That if the Shankaracharyas are not ready to accept the religious role that the Prime Minister is taking upon himself, then clearly Hindus do not have to accept Hindutva. Hindutva is not a religious philosophy, it is a political point of view. And you can decide, do you want to vote for an India that bases itself on religion, like Pakistan has done? Or do you want an India that bases itself on moral values that are common to all religions, as Mahatma Gandhi said when he sang, Ishwara Allah Tero Naam, Sabko Sanmati De Bhagwan. So that is the India we need, and it is the India from which we've been drifting for the last 10 years. The time has now come to say basta and remove these Hindutva elements from power so that we can go back to the path of sanity.
On that note, thank you so much, Mr. Aiyar. It is always a pleasure to talk to you. And we look forward to the next book in this.
I think it will come out sometime this summer or autumn. Let's see. But I hope even in that book, which describes my fall from office and my marginalization, that you won't find rancor in it. But I can only hope that, because after all, I'm human. And there is bound to be some rancor. But if I can stop it from being in the pen, so much the better. But I hope we'll meet again, and you can let me know whether I've succeeded in controlling my anger.
Right. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Subscribe to the Federal's YouTube page for more news and updates.